Okay. Okay. Good.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to start our lecture tonight. Um, this is Amy, and Amy Barry manages the Utah Cemeteries Program within the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO. In this position, she oversees cemetery preservation efforts, administers a grant for cemeteries, manages a database of burials of over 700,000 records, and maintains a map of cemeteries and burial sites throughout the state. She is driven by preserving our past. Amy conducts workshops with the public and cemetery personnel to teach proper methods for cleaning, resetting, and repairs. Amy has also a lab workshop in the SHPO office where she tackles more difficult restorations on stones for cemeteries throughout the state. Restoration work adheres to the preservation guidelines and techniques. The cemeteries program manager has been leading preservation of headstones within Utah since 2019. Her work has given her an excuse to spend a lot of time in cemeteries, and she enjoys talking about preservation with anyone who will listen. She has an MS from the University of Montana in environmental studies and another MS from University of Utah in political science and public administration. She has been published in the Association of Gravestone Studies quarterly publication and presented at the American Institute for Conservation Conference. Without further ado, this is Amy.
Hello. So I just talk and it's going? Okay, cool. Well, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'm glad some people came. You never know if people are going to show up, and I feel good. So though I forgot what I wrote for her, so there's a little bit of redundancy, but I am with the State Historic Preservation Office, and I think my boss, Chris Merritt, was here April 2nd for a lecture. He probably had really cool artifacts. I have really cool pictures. I don't really take anything from there that I don't take back. So, but this is just an overview of what my program does. Originally, when I was hired 10 years ago, I was the cemetery and burials database manager, and that was it. And over the course of the 10 years that I've been doing this has become an actual program. And I have some state mandates regarding collecting burial data from cemeteries and putting it in that database, and maintaining a list of cemeteries and kind of random burial sites, kind of like the one at Kimball Junction, the little fence, like 2 or 3 in there. I have to maintain a list of those. And I now have those in an interactive map for those people who really like to see spatially where they go. The grant I administer, the museum has taken advantage of that for Glenwood a few times. And then we'll talk tonight about preservation. So one of the things that I asked Diane, like, what do you want me to talk about tonight? Because there's loads of things I can or cannot talk about, whatever you want. But the 2 questions she asked was like, well, how many historic cemeteries are there in Utah? And what are they doing to preserve them? So I thought, well, let me break that up into 2 parts tonight to talk about. One is, what makes a historic cemetery? Any idea? As I don't have one. Old. Well, I'm included in that too. By federal law, I'm an antiquity too. So, there's really no universal definition of what's a historic cemetery. Clearly, this is Glenwood, and we're going to take a tour of the state tonight. I was also told you've already had a history of Glenwood Cemetery, so I didn't need to confine myself just to that. These historic headstones are found throughout the state, right? They're everywhere. There's different parts of cemeteries, though, that catch my eye, that have historic features that kind of lend themselves to be a little bit more historic, and we'll kind of talk about those. But one of the things that may come to mind is the National Register of Historic Places. And there's very few cemeteries on that list in Utah. There's Glenwood, Fillmore, which Glenwood is kind of cooler than Fillmore, but don't spread that around. The mausoleum of an altarist in Ogden, not the cemetery because they're privately owned and they're doing their fair share to ruin the historic headstone part of the cemetery, but the mausoleum part is cool. And Brigham Young's burial and Cedar Fort down in Utah County, the whole fort, but the cemetery is also on the register, and Yosepa Settlement Cemetery out in Tooele County. And that's really it. But there's loads that qualify. Do you know of another one?
See, that's fast. Did I is there that I didn't.
That is on the register too. Thank you. Okay, they're Grafton. Yeah, Grafton is a really great cemetery. So there's loads though that qualify. It's just a lot of paperwork and a lot of time, and nobody has spearheaded it. So I don't really consider the National Register of Historic Places to be the benchmark of what a historic cemetery is, especially for Utah, because we don't have a ton. But we are going to take a tour around the state, and you can admire all my amazing photos. And then I can tell Merritt that they like my photos better than your artifacts. But well, kind of this first part, I'm gonna talk about the different things in cemeteries that may or may not be historic, that catch my eye, that can also lend themselves to a place being kind of worth preserving. Well, they're all worth preserving, but the components worth preserving. So this is Virgin. And this particular family plot has a lot going on. It's almost like a little too crazy for me, but there's only 2 real historic things in here. What do you think they are? Those, those 2? No. These 2. So I think this is Delsa. She died in 1919, and her brother Edward in the war in 44. All these other stones are modern. So this stone, modern. There's a lot happening, and it's almost like a little whiplash going on. But these 2 things, and they're not crypts. So for her case, we would have a coffin and his most likely a casket. They're buried. These were just like a thing, right? They're called basals because they're kind of like an enclosure with a wall. And the wall needs to be fairly small. It can't be like a huge 6-foot wall. This is bordering maybe not a basal. But I got a photo of Delsa that was posted on the internet in 2016 and can barely see it from shrubbery. So I think the family has done some serious cleanup here. But one of the things that also catches my eye is this right here is probably indicative of what this really looked like with the proper mortar. And they have come and put in all of this caulking, which is not right, but it's an effort, right, to preserve this. And so you give them credit for that. These people died in the 70s, so this probably had no issues in terms of its degradation and collapse. This is something that I would gravitate towards, and then I would have to parse out in here, what's historic, what's actually done kind of at the time that qualifies as historic in this cornucopia of things going on. But I also think this is a really great reflection of what cemeteries can be for families, as well as a reflection of how they wanted it, right? And the things that they thought were interesting. And I mean, rock landscaping, you've got the mounds here, you've got the basals, you've got a fairly large, right? We might actually call that one a crypt, although they're still, the caskets are buried. And then a lot of modern headstones. So when you look at a landscape like this, you also see other coping, and that's concrete and not anything that interesting. But there's some historic headstones around in Virgin. This is what you would typically see. This is in Spring City, San Pete County, and this says erected in 1891. It's a opening to a brick wall, so it's just there for show. But everything about this is historic. So we have this great entrance to nothing, but cool enough that this wall needs some serious help, right? The original fencing, this is another view of it. So you can kind of see this isn't in terrible shape. The wall is in marked shape. But these are the things that are historic that we at the State Historic Preservation Office would recognize and would try. This is a little beyond what I can do, but would try to help the cemetery if they were interested in trying to preserve, because these are the components that we want to save. And just to show you, we do have above ground crypts throughout the state, mostly either one-offs, and I'll see them and go, oh, wow, that's interesting. This is in Mount Olivet down in Salt Lake City, and there's a whole collection of them. And these are really well taken care of. And I know the cemetery is not taking care of them, so it must be the families, because the cemetery doesn't do much to preserve in there. But we have some really great above ground crypts throughout, so it's not unheard of. But I don't see them very often. So this is B'nai Israel, which is in Salt Lake City. It's adjacent to the city cemetery. And these are the things that I love. I mean, the things that catch my eye and I get over, I will share with you tonight because as Diane said, if anybody will listen, I'm happy to talk about them. But this is a coping, right? And it's not really a wall. It probably isn't very tall. It's probably sunk maybe like 3 inches. It would be wonderful to get that back up and going. But I love it when the cemeteries leave that. A lot of cemeteries remove coping and fencing. And why? Yeah, mowing. It's the lamest thing I've ever heard of, like to mow. Most people like try not to mow, it's like it's chore. And then they like want to make it like, no, we got to mow it. So it's really sad. We've lost a lot of this type of history and historical features in our cemeteries because of mowing and because of especially private cemeteries, like I mentioned, all to rest, so they can mow easier and it's cheaper for them. So I get really excited when we have cemeteries that have kept it, even though it's has some issues. And then just up the way in Salt Lake City is another one. So this shed is B'nai Israel, so I didn't travel far for this photo. But this is very original, and it's on a little slope, so that's why we have some settling. Just looks different. This is more of a wall than a coping, but super cool to me. I love all of these different features. This Jennings massive monument is in good shape, minus the missing ornament here, which is probably an urn, which is, as my grandma would say, grew legs and walked out of there somehow. A lot of things grow legs, walk out of cemeteries, but just another example. But here we're gonna start seeing some other things. So this one is in Freedom, Utah. I think is in San Pete County. So we have all these historic stones. We have great sandstone bases. And then the family came and they're like, dude, we're going to pour some concrete and we're going to attach it to the sandstone base and then fill this with dirt. And isn't this going to make it stand out? It sort of makes it stand out, but this is the worst thing to do. And this particular monument is shifting. It's sinking on this side. So in order to try and get this before it ends up falling over and, probably a decade would be enormously difficult now because you'd have to dig down even further, but you'd have to deal with extricating this concrete and not damaging the sandstone base. And we all know sandstone's fairly brittle. So when I have to try to take concrete off them, it's really hard because I'm chipping it away. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think in Glenwood, Rusty is bringing a lot of the stone ones up. And and then I think when you see what the real state of the concrete was, they probably, some of these may not have been thoroughly original. And so you'd have to really look at it of what its state is. Yeah. I mean, concrete, I am not a lover of concrete. So I'm always like, don't put more concrete in there. And I have some other examples of why I hate concrete, but this would be one of them. So here we have beautiful historic stones and then that, which is not what we want to see. And obviously not historic and not something we want to preserve, and makes any preservation job more difficult. Right? Porterville. This is one of my favorite. How many of you have been up to Porterville? Okay, we got one. You guys think I love Porterville. This is clearly not historic either. I mean, there's a lamppost, right? But this fencing, to me, this is a great example of there may have been a historic fence here. And then it was just so bad that they put in a new one. But it's not awful, right? It's not one that just jars your eyeballs and makes you think this is the worst thing I've ever seen here. It blends in really well So I don't know what the state of the other fence was. I'm pretty sure there was one. But this is just one to kind of show you, like, here we're starting to blur the line of the historic components, but we have loads of historic headstones throughout Porterville. And then we just have this really quaint, nice thing. And sometimes I forget about the lamppost because it kind of blends in fairly well, although I probably would have never made the decision to put that in there. But that's Echo. So then if we go to Echo, and this is my only picture I had of this, should probably go back up there. This thing drives me nuts, right? I mean, there's a lot in Echo that's on the National Register, including that building. I can't remember, was that the church or the school? Yeah, I can't remember which one is on the register, but nobody folded in the cemetery in their application. So cemetery is not, but it's totally historic, all these beautiful stones. And then that white vinyl fence, which I get why they did it, but there was no fence there originally, given what's going on in the rest of the cemetery. And then that, which is, when you look at what goes into the National Historic Register, that would be a non-contributing feature that if you have too many of those, then this would most likely have a harder time qualifying to get on the register. So you don't want to like set the, and what happens a lot of times is one person will do it and then another person and another person. And so that's one of my least favorite things to see, is like something so modern and so out of place, especially in one like Echo that is fully historic. So then if we kind of jump around, I thought we'd go a little north. This is Logan. And Logan has all these really great fencing and has kept them. Justin, the sexton, is like, yeah, why would I want to get rid of these? I love them. And he doesn't even regulate the headstone size like a lot of modern ones do. He has a lot of really cool stuff in the Logan Cemetery. And this is one of I have like my favorite cemeteries that are kind of more wild, I guess. No grass or just natural-ish. And then I have my manicured ones. Logan's one of my favorite manicured ones. But this is a great example of a historic fence. It's one of the lower ones. You don't see those a whole lot around the state, but it's got beautiful wear. It's in beautiful condition. Back to Salt Lake City, only because I think this one is like one of my absolute, like, it's just gorgeous. The artistry work in this fencing is quite amazing. And we have these wonderful historic stones, but we're missing the column to this guy. And he's not like, that one had to grow several legs to walk out of there because it's pretty heavy. Should have looked like that. And I often wonder, like, what happened to that, right? So we're missing parts to the history of this family plot, but it's just an example of how gorgeous the fencing can be. But then we're going to jump to Teasdale. And, who wouldn't pay money for that view now, let alone to have it be a resting place? This fence is wildly different, but I love it just as much, right? And these people died in the 40s. So then the question becomes, was this fence likely done around that time period? And given the climate in Teasdale, the wear on those fence posts seems fairly accurate. The gate is very indicative of that time period. And, it's Teasdale. They're probably like, well, we got this type of fencing. We can get it at the store. And they did it. The boarding around the bottom may have been replaced here or there. But I love these types of things. And this is also an example of a historic feature within a cemetery that we want to try to save. And so these types of cemeteries that are more natural, you'll find these things more often because they don't care about mowing, right? They're not worried about that. They don't water. And those are the cemeteries I see the least amount of problems in too, in terms of headstone. Teasdale, which is Wayne County. So if you were going to Torrey, so you've gone through Bicknell and Low and all the guys, Teasdale's just off the way. And then if you kept going, you'd hit Torrey. Got to go a little ways down for it. And this is about what is in Teasdale. But it's great. I love it. And I love the view. I mean, that's one of those places where I just kind of could just have lunch here because this is really great. Anyway, then we'll Ephraim. I seem to put a lot of San Pete County in here. I just realized. So Ephraim has two cemeteries. This is their pioneer cemetery, and it's really rather large. But I wanted to give you like a variety of fencing. They're not all that ornate, amazing ironworks. This family plot, pretty much everything in there is historic, except for that angel there. It's fairly new, but this is very indicative of like what I would expect to see in like the late 1890s, early 1900s. It's falling apart, and that's okay too. This may be what the state defense looked like in Porterville before the family was like, let's replace that. But they did it in a way that was very indicative. But here we have the right construction for that time period with like double rails. And then these slats are like in between the rails because they didn't have the same method to like, keep them in. And so the fences or the gate is pretty much gone. But this is also equally something that I'm really thrilled that Ephraim has left, and their pioneer cemetery, they're pretty much just leave alone completely. But I equally love this as well. Yeah. Those are footstones. So most likely they belong to this, and they'll have initials, and then you'll find their full name and epitaph on. This is a column, I can tell from this part. So yeah, those are footstones. Okay, so here we're in Bluff, and there's nothing historic going on in this except for those two headstones. And I don't hate it, but I don't love it, right? So it's new stone foundation, new fencing, all of the rock inside. These drive me nuts. So these are so polished, and these are historically what we call bedsteads. But you can tell these are they were done way after the fact. So I want you, this is going to be our landmark in the next photo because we're going to look at a different area. That monument is right there. So we're coming at it from the other side. This is what I want to see. These are very historic bedsteads. And often you just get like the burial. Every now and then you get it outlining a family or a double plot. But this is what these should look like, not what we just saw. And I hope that that's what they were. And the family just put all those new rocks on top of it and didn't destroy what was there. But these are especially down in more of the southern area and in the West Desert area. These are very prevalent. And this sometimes is the only indication that we have a burial. So when I walk around and if I'm with people in the cemetery or whatnot, and I point these out, they'll often say, like, I had no idea what those were. So we can kind of get an idea of where people were buried. These headstones came later, and most likely, I don't know if it was the family or the cemetery decided to try to mark them, but they would just be marked with bedsteads. And in areas where you have a lot of other growth, sometimes they can get obscured. And so you really want to pay attention to, as I walk around and try to read the land of what's happening. But these are the things that are historic that I would want to see, not the other one, right? And then I'm just going to end you with Schofield, which is my absolute favorite cemetery in the whole state. And it's beautiful. They have so many beautiful fencing. I love it. But I'm not ending here, but we're getting close to the end in this part. So one of the things that we can tell from Schofield, from this gate, I should have a badge here of who the ironworks company was. I have one over here. Most likely it was the same, but it's these pillars, and I don't know what they are called. Some point I should probably start learning more about ironworks, but I only have one life to live, so I got to pick and choose sometimes. But these exact same design from the same ironworks company are here in Eureka. But a vastly different fence, right? So there's a lot of crossover, and then this is the badge where I expect to see on the other one, and the badges are all identified, their logos by their shape. So I know this one is Stewart Company from Cincinnati, and I really get excited when I see gate badges. I run up to them with my camera, and I take close-ups because I absolutely love them. But here's a little collection of some of them. So this tells us at the time who was manufacturing this, and this Stewart, and then later on it becomes Stewart and Sons. Ironworks Company of Cincinnati is very prevalent. This is the only one I've ever seen from Decatur, Indiana. And this is in East Carbon City in Carbon County. That's actually not a bad, but in the gate, the top of the gate. This is the one I see also a lot. So this shape is very unique, and I know, and then immediately it's Krager Wire and Iron from Salt Lake. And these guys went out of business not terribly long ago, like in the last couple decades. So they've been around for a really, really, really long time, and they're everywhere throughout the state, and a lot of different designs. And so I get really, really quite excited for that. And then this is the only J.P. Fowler one I have ever seen from Salt Lake City in the state, and this is in Vernon, which is Tooele County. And they were a carriage wire and iron company, and then they became like an auto dealer when carriages went out of fashion and automobiles came along, and then they went out of business. But we have some really great. There's some other ones too from like Missouri and those things, but those are kind of the hits. Okay, so we're going to leave this section of historic cemetery tour throughout the state with Springdale. Springdale is just had their meeting with to get this on the National Register of Historic Places. So this will be another one. This is their historic cemetery up on a hill, and this is one where I've been down there plenty, but I was just down there with kind of the new batch of city workers, talking about what to do about all of this stuff. And like, this is new; they're not allowing these things anymore. But they have so many bedsteads throughout this, and none of them had a clue. So they were talking about, where do we want our past? And I'm like, well, don't do it here and don't do it there. And now they're starting to see like, oh, wow, we have a lot of these bedsteads that are marking graves. And we know somebody's there, but we don't know who it is. But we still don't want to path over it, right? And we don't want to disturb the bedsteads. But Springdale will most likely be our next cemetery on the National Register. Okay. Now I thought we'd move into then the second question Diane posed was like, what are cemeteries doing to preserve their historic features? The answer is mostly nothing, right? Glenwood is probably the one that has done the most. And I try to very much promote this. I run into a lot of problems with cemeteries because at some point, probably in like the 70s and 80s, there must have just been a thing where they all decided, hey, these are private property, and mainly because they didn't want the liability of being responsible for them financially as well. And so a lot of them won't do anything. They won't touch them. And there's some cemeteries that won't let me touch them. But I do have really good relationships with a lot of them. And like in Salt Lake City, I was able to work with them, and I wrote up a policy that didn't run afoul of their ordinance, but allows the sexton to grant me permission to do work. So I pick and choose some work in that cemetery. And then now, as I've gotten around over the years, I have cemeteries that will call me and ask me like, hey, I have this thing. Can you help? I heard you could do it. And so I go down there, and then usually I can help. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But what do you all think preservation is? I didn't hear a thing other than a lot of murmuring. Go ahead.
Well, what they did is always take the wild log,
Zero.
just eat it about the love, get it,
Yep.
the time to get. Well, the second, we have a goal, we say, yeah, but we've got something good. I cut the response here done
In Glenwood.
at the Glenwood.
Yeah.
Well, especially if there's the lawsuit.
Yep.
Because they don't get so much of, I think, all of the years that part of the year,
Sure.
Johnny, wet.
Sure.
So you're not to do nothing
Well, I think that in
about it.
areas like Glenwood versus, say, Teasdale, yeah, an annual, at least mowing, weed whacking in Glenwood is warranted. And from what I understood previously, I used to do that in the spring. And then, by the fall, it was really grown up. And then,
Well, we
yeah,
we have quickly go around the edge, across the roads.
yeah,
You like the wild.
yeah. And every cemetery is going to be unique in like who's in charge and who's running it. And it reflects the things that you want to see in there. So if you want more of a natural cemetery, have it. If you want one that's more manicured like Park City, then have it. I see less problems. Glenwood is different because of the amount of moisture you get. So the ground settles and yada yada. But typically in their cemeteries without lawns, without that mowing and the watering of sprinklers, I see less preservation issues. Glen would be different. Schofield's different because they get a lot of snow too.
That
Yeah.
to tell me they got careful that we had
Yeah.
nice stuff.
Yeah, it nicks the monuments all the time. So yeah, you can't be heavy-handed on the weed whacker. So every cemetery that is watering, whether it's for grass or you just get a lot of moisture like Glenwood or Schofield, you have things will sink and things will be reclaimed. And I sometimes have to do a lot of probing. Salt Lake City, I have to do a lot of probing sometimes for bases. I'm like, I know there's a base around here. Figure out where it goes. And that's expected. I don't know how we can absolutely never have that happen.
What do you need that state?
Like, is my little thing on? No. So that's the base. So sometimes like these, I may like pull this up and it's kind of on its own and I got to go find the base because I want to use the originals. And then I got to go find it. And if it's broken, I might be able to reconstruct it or not. But yeah. So we have different components to everything. So this one's got a base. This one has a pedestal, aka plinth, and then a column shaft of a monument. Same there. These are more just headstone. If it's flat, those are typically called markers. So, but you just call them all headstones. It all works. It's just when you get more into it, you kind of understand the components to it. So I didn't hear what preservation was. Go ahead.
I just really decided and say that from damaging his substance not to be damage in the person like thinking not just as for they don't
Yeah.
Don't degradation and to see the lighting.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think there is a wrong answer on this one. So go ahead. Anybody else? Okay. Preservation is a very broad topic. One thing people will say is you're preserving the past, which I am. But in my case, I feel like a lot of what I really try to do is maintain the integrity of the headstones that I'm fixing. I think we want to, there's a headstone to me is a lot more than the epitaph for the person. There's a lot of things being told with any headstone. In Glenwood, you're telling the story of your town's history of all of the trades with their symbols, the Freemasons, all of those, which is fabulous. So there's so many stories. The artistry of this carving, which was hand done, all of it, right? So there's a lot of things in this that I want to try to maintain the integrity, but I can't recreate stone in a way like actual stone. So when we go through, we'll see we're going to start with some not so great. And I start this way so that then you see my work and you be like, boy, that girl's good because it's not like this bad, right? So I'm just setting the bar low for me. But yeah, not so great. Not so great. The two things I hate the most, concrete and siltstone. But you should never introduce a stone or put a historic stone into wet concrete or like Portland mortar. Anything that's harder than your historic stone is a big no-no. And I can't do anything about this. This is now done, right? So don't ever do that. But we'll see a lot of the problems that come about that. So I just did a couple collages we'll walk through of things that I see. These are all my photos. So this one is in Jolly Gifford. It's in Springdale. And this is our main cemetery. And I mean, like, how sloppy. But what drives me absolutely batty is this. They didn't brace it. And so now it's slid and it's stuck there because they used a cementatious thing. And there's this like lip. Drives me nuts. Like, if you're going to do something with a good intentions, at least pay attention to your details. This is in Cedar City, and this was a big thing. And I still hear people say, like, oh, we should brace that. And I'm like, oh, no, you shouldn't. Driving the nail in this is what caused this. Otherwise, this would never be there, right? And so it helps make this stone have less of a lifespan. This is in Oak City. And not only did they set this in wet cement, they pinned it, which wasn't necessary, and then this bar that has bolts from the front. And you can see all of this. Like, this stone is now on its way out. And I won't even touch it because there's nothing I can do to help this. And that was all very unnecessary. And it did not help it. This is in Wanship. And I don't even know what this is. Like, I didn't even want to touch it. I was like, I don't know what that's going on here. But it's stuck like that. So it's something that I can then never fix because they've done whatever that is. Oh, this is back down in East Carbon City. And they've painted this. And this is kind of like a white vinyl fence to me. Like it like glares in the sunlight. So you can't miss it. And you should never do that. I mean, how many of you have heard of never painting your brick if you have a brick house? Like, right, for preservation. This stone is the same thing. All this is doing is reflecting sunlight, but it also is trapping the moisture. So not only, I mean, yeah, rain and the sprinklers, but you're getting moisture from the ground that's coming up through your stone. And those water vapors can now not escape because we've painted this. So inside of this, the stone is just starting to crumble on its own. And eventually, as the paint flakes off, there will be nothing I could do to save it because the moisture then is deteriorating the molecules in the stone. This is encasement, and I think this is in Springville. This is still very much what's going on. And monument companies, if the cemetery will say like, hey, this fell down, it's broken, the monument company will be like, yeah, we'll just put in concrete because they don't really care. They don't really care about doing it right. And this is, again, the worst thing to do. This was meant to be standing up. This was something that I could have repaired. But once it's encased in concrete, I can't do anything about it. And now it's laying down. This beautiful carving of most likely a flower is now just a gunky mess of biological growth. And as this continues to deteriorate, especially the concrete expands and contracts with our temperature ranges. And that's what it's doing. And the marble can't fight it because the concrete's harder than the marble. This, I can't remember where, but I see this everywhere. There's 2 repair attempts a year they're holding. And I'm pretty sure this was probably clear when whoever did it. I don't know what it is. And that's what it discolored in UV radiation. And so many of these just look like a mess because they didn't take any care and it just smeared. And now this is what it looks like. And I have cemeteries ask me all the time, how do we clean this? And I'm like, you really can't. It's a glue adhesive thing. And there you go. I can't get that off without like damaging the stone. Frisco. And I really have no words for that. I know what they were trying to do. It was unnecessary. And then this. So it's like, I remember walking around to the other side and just being like, I'll take a picture of that. Castlegate. This is a good example. They painted, and I don't know, silicone. You probably can't see it, but this is where that water vapor is starting to deteriorate. So it's delaminating here, and this is just like mush. The stone is just mush there. And I often wonder, like, these 2 type of things, like, whoever did them, I wonder if they had a moment where they thought, this isn't really turning out how I thought it would. I'll just keep going.
Yep.
I'll just keep going at it, and it'll get better. And it'll get better, right? And these are unfortunate because I can't then do anything with this at all. So I can't save The stone, I can't see the integrity of it. It's really so yeah. This is the one in Wanship Pioneer. And what I will give them credit for is they didn't have any slippage, but it is a bender. They didn't quite brace it that way, but they lined it up right there. You know, the best they could have done. And when they're holding like that and then they're secure, I don't bother with them because I don't want to damage any more of the stone. There's often times where I've picked up a stone and it's just fallen apart in my hands because it's already starting its way out. But so this set the bar low for me to show you proper methods, because I do headstone preservation by preservation standards, and I won't do them differently. And honestly, it's probably cheaper if you did it proper. It just takes more time. It's more of an effort on my part in terms of like man hours. But okay, we'll start with this. So this is in Glenwood. And in 2019, I hosted the first preservation workshop, and I had no idea I would be doing this at the time. My idea was to train the monument companies. So we had a 3-day workshop. I brought in Jason Church from the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training and Rusty Brenner from Texas Cemetery Restorations. And we spent 2 days in Glenwood. And no monument company was interested. Nobody came. I called them, I emailed them, I did everything. And I left that 3-day workshop and I realized if preservation was going to be something that my program took on, I was going to have to do it. So I never would have thought when 10 years ago I was hired, you told me I would be fixing headstones, I would have been like, I don't know what you're smoking, but I'm not doing that. And yeah, here I am, I guess. So this is a very common issue, and that's the leaning, right? So these are the potential health and safety issues that I often talk to cemeteries about, because legally they really do own their headstones, especially the historic ones. And I tell them, like, you don't want to put your hands on it, and I get it, but why would you want this to fall over and then become an issue for you and mowing and then people and all of that stuff? So they start to, it's like you speak their language and they're like, oh, that's a good point. And then they start to see other things. And so as I go around and do that, I'm probably have more work than I can personally deal with as one person. So I really want to educate and train other people. It's just there's not a lot of people who really want to do it either, but we're getting there. So if we look at what's happening here, we have 3 components. We have the base, then we have this quasi-column, monument shaft, and then this ornament, which happens to be a ball. The good thing I can tell when we came across it is Gibson is walking. So he's sliding and we call it walking. That means nobody glued that, which makes me happy. I see that, and other people would see leaning, and I'd be like, ooh, I can fix that. This base, and unfortunately this cut off the bottom. We had to lift that base out, and that base is huge, and 2/3 of that needed to come out of the ground. So that took a while, and then we had to strap it up and hoist it up. But again, and then we did our setting compound. But what drives me nuts again is whoever did glue that ball paid no attention. It is not centered vertically or horizontally. Can you see that? And so every time I go to Glenwood, I can't look at it because it's like, oh, and I never realized how much OCD I may have until these things. But yeah, that drives me absolutely batty. If you're going to glue something, dry fit it first. But he's looking great. And this is probably the most prevalent type of thing I can work with cemeteries on and teach them how to do it so they don't feel so reticent to touch them. This is another one we did in 2019. And this is one of my only times where I will use epoxy. I will only use epoxy when it is something that was originally one piece. Because if you remember, we have all these components. We have a base, we have the plinth, we have the column, we have a cap, we have an ornament. None of those were glued before historically. They all should move, and that could help me take them apart. So I will use epoxy when something was one piece and I have really good contact. But epoxy is one of those things you can't really undo. So I'm very, very chintzy with it. But we had this is how I came upon it. And I was like, oh, I don't want this to grow legs and walk out of here. So in 2019, that was the previous repair, but you can see this was one piece. So we took that out, chiseled that out, and I epoxied that in, and that still looks really great. Somebody posted a picture of that online, and I was like, ooh, I did that. So I don't know where the top of the cross is. Maybe it's down there. So if ever any of you are interested, you should probably maybe go probe around and you might find it, and then I'll fix it. But, and then a couple of years ago with Rusty, this is one that I went up. Sometimes I pop up and help him, and then I leave. I'm still all the time. But this is also in Glenwood. So these are the types of more easy things, but make a huge difference because Yates was going down, right? And it wasn't so much that you needed to weed whack, it was down in the ground. So these are fairly straightforward. There's something that always happens. There was a big coping right at the end of this, so it made it hard for us to extricate that base, but we got it because we're tenacious. We do it. But those are some of the easier stuff. And then we're going to do some of a tour of the state again. So this is one I did in Salt Lake City in the historic Japanese area. It's a hillside and it's in very bad shape. So I do a little bit in there every year. This stone belongs to that. How the heck that got that far, I have no idea because that sucker's heavy. And this is the bottom and it should face west. So it flipped around. I don't know how it happened. It's pretty far away. But I was like, all right, well, I know it goes there, so let's do it. So as we dug this out to level this and get all this off, I encountered that thing. So somebody, not originally, put a lot of cement in that hole thinking oh, it'll stay level forever now, right? Well, it didn't. That was about 3 inches down. I had no idea it was that big. I couldn't level this properly with that in there. The only good thing I'll say is that it wasn't set in the wet cement. And then I had to figure out how to get that off. But when we finally were able to strap it and pull that off, I think I told this cemetery, I got it out of the hole. You guys have to come and take it away. This is the best I can do. But I often find this is a big deal, and that's why I hate cement. But this happens all the time. People at some point, decades ago, were like, oh, we'll get these level for cement. We'll put it in the wet cement. It'll be great. It never helps, ever. But now we've got it upright and correct. And so it's going to stay there for hopefully my lifetime. This is one that I did in Beaver. And I was doing a repair a few graves down, and then I saw this like this. And I said to the cemetery, why don't you let me fix this? This has a great anchor, which was the logo for the AOUW, the American Order of United Workers. And you have these in Glenwood. It was one of those trades insurance company type things. And if you were a member of that, you could have this anchor on your headstone. And so I was like, oh, let me do this. I took this back to my lab and yada, yada. Eventually, so here's what happens when you put these in wet cement. So this got cemented in to the base at some point, and it got hit. This thing is 4 feet tall. This is one of the taller tablets I've seen or worked on. And there it is. It's sunk, and then something hit it, a monument truck or the lawnmower really hard, and it broke. It had to find a place to break. It was in a slot. It should have fallen out of the slot and then maybe break upon impact because this was so tall. But it can't. It has to find a new place to break where the weakest, because it met with a pretty hard force. As it fell, it did that, and then somebody stacked it, and it had been there for a very long time like that. So when I started this repair, I did do an epoxy down here, but there was no contact. This is all my mortar. And I use a very specific lime-based mortar that is historically accurate and is softer than the stone, but this hardens up pretty hard. When I have to take it out, I have to chisel it, but it comes out easily. There was no material here. So I got this back up. And when I do a repair, you usually can tell it's been there, right? But I have multiple colors happening here, so I didn't tint that mortar. And I just was coming up from St. George last month, and I stopped by to see how he was looking. I did clean him with something called D2 Biological Solutions, which is a biocide, but it also, for marble, will start over time whitening this back up. So he's whitening up pretty good, and the repair is less visually jarring. So I think by next year he might be even wider than that, I'll check on him again. So that's probably do. So this is from Cleveland down in Enrique. This isn't how I found it, but I laid everything out and then I realized I hadn't taken a photo. So this was my first photo. And this was one where this is a pin burst. So a lot of these smaller headstones, or when you get your columns are really tall and there's ornaments that are getting smaller, they'll have a pin, and it wasn't meant to, like, it's not glued. It was just meant to give it some stability because it could fall over or knock over. But the problem is these pins were metal, and as water gets in there, they rust, they corrode, and they expand. And because marble is a fairly soft stone, they will burst and they will just break. So you can see the pin holes right there, and then there they were in the base. This was a fairly difficult one to do because these didn't fit together and connect. There was just voids all throughout this. But I was able to get it repaired and back up. And once we took apart what was broken here, there was a fairly flat base, so I just reused what was there. And this was pretty flush to the ground, so that's how much of the base was below ground. So we get that up and going in. So this is where I'm saying I'm trying to preserve the integrity of the stone, of the epitaph, but just that whole piece to where I can. So something like the cemetery was like, I don't know if you can do anything. And I thought, well, I guess we'll see. And that's the great thing about, I don't really charge them money, so I get to try. And then if I have to say, like, it failed, then you're not out anything. But I learn as I go too of like what I know will be possible. Here is Randolph, just to show you that I do travel the state. How am I on time? So this is a lot of repair. There's 2 different repair attempts. The base was gone, repaired, and somebody had just sunk it in the ground there, and it kept falling over, and then somebody sunk it in there. So you can see all of this orange, which isn't showing up so good in that picture, is iron in their water. And water was secondary, and it'll stain everything. And orange is like the worst color to match in a tint, that I kind of tried to make it not so. Because the D2 will not do anything. Iron is mineral, and D2 is a biocide. And nothing really takes this out without making the stone look a little weird. So if, everything in there is orange, there's really nothing I can do about it. But I remember the person I was working with was like, oh, no, we don't need a new base. I'm like, yeah, you do, because there's going to be all this other stuff. There's the carver, there's this, we want all that showing. And this is where I made her find somebody to do a concrete slab base. I'll give you the dimensions. You pour me a slab base in concrete, but the stone never touches the concrete. So it's all dried and cured. And then I line it with a bunch of mortar so that the slot is a little bigger than the stone. And that's the only time that I'll say, like, let's do a concrete base, but it's never touching wet stone. This is Oak City. Just to give you, I'm just going to run through these last ones to give you an idea of what it can look like, and then what a repair can do to try to preserve it and keep it upright so that it continues to be okay for decades to come. This is Farron. So a couple of years ago, Farron had a horrible windstorm that knocked down a bunch of their trees, and this was what happened to this. And they called me down and said, "Can you?" And I said, "Yes, I can." So this is what it originally was, this column arch, and there was a lot of missing material, which I was just there yesterday, and I filled in the rest of these gaps. But it can look like that, and we can still preserve it, right? Because the stone pretty much was still in good shape. It just, the tree took it out, right? Nobody had done anything horribly nefarious to it, like we've seen. And then this is Fillmore. They had a bout of vandalism in the fall. Somebody went around and toppled over and broke 30 stones. And I was there a couple weeks ago, and I repaired 10 of them. But this is one of the few examples. This is why I put it up here, because this had only been sitting this way over the winter. So this had great contact. It was a super clean break as breaks go. And so you can barely tell where my repair is on this one. So if I get them quick, they can look pretty good. So that's the end of my tour of the state. And preservation attempts that I do and what I encounter and what's historic, what's not. And you don't have to clap. It's okay. But yeah, any course, this is one in Morgan that was cleaned with D2. All of that biogrowth on the bottom is now dead. Where'd my bear go? So it kills all this biogrowth and all this mold in here, and so it's looking pretty good. That took a couple of years though. For sure.
You put on base. I believe that that's yeah.
Oh, I reset on ideally. I get 3/4 minus crushed rock, and that's what I will put in the hole, and then I will level that on there, so I get a really good compaction with that that low crushed rock. If you use shiny rock like pea gravel for landscaping, it'll disperse with weight on it. So you want a different rock that will compact, and then I won't get as much movement. I had one I did on the Japanese hillside when I went back up there a couple weeks ago to identify ones, and a gopher had taken my repair out. It's sunk in a hole. That was a gopher. I can't manage the gopher. But I use the crushed rock, and that's the best base for this. You don't want to put dirt back in it, and concrete obviously doesn't help anything.
That's the
Yeah, he gets the crushed rock. That's yeah. Yeah, he knows what he's doing. Yeah, it's just like a grittier rock, and when you can't find it, I'll use a little bit larger crushed rock that way. But 3/4 minus is the best size for that compaction. But sometimes you get what you can buy, and well-meaning people who thought this would be the perfect solution. Often when they're that base with that was stuck, somebody put concrete below there and then put that in wet concrete. I have to get that concrete off, or I can't level it. Because usually they're that big massive one. They're not nice. It's hard to level something that's oddly shaped if it is a concrete mass. So those we have to go out and Rusty has a jackhammer. I don't really have that. I have to do a lot of manual hitting it with my pry bars and swim. Yeah, he's pulled it out. I've seen it. Yeah, he's pulled it out. I've seen it, but yeah. That's one of the reasons, right? The second reason is that the concrete is harder than our historic stones, and it will expand and contract with our temperature fluctuations, with our freeze and thaw, and the marble doesn't do that. So with that pressure going on around it, it doesn't. If the marble is in that concrete, then that part of the marble is going to be the loser in that battle. When you put it into wet cement as a new base and something hits it, or a gopher takes it out, it has to find a place to break. So now it can't pop out. And these smaller ones, it would pop out and then they wouldn't break, and I could just fix it great. I wouldn't have to do a repair like on Fred that was really tall. So in introducing that, they think, oh, this will be great forever, but it doesn't. And then say it doesn't get hit, and it's a tall tablet like that, and it starts to lean, because invariably it will, the more it leans and it's still stuck in place, the marble will bend, and I won't have a straight monument. I'll start to get gravity force. And so then I have this curved tablet that, again, I can't do anything with. And then when it's in the hole like that, I have to get it out because I won't be able to level it. And leveling is 90% success of anything I do. So when somebody says oh, it's not that bad, it's well, if you want me to work on it, we have to level this, because otherwise it'll just be a problem. No, I don't do work for the families. If a family member called me up and said, oh, I would say I can't I don't want to go down that road. So I do say like, hey, there's this person you can hire. There's this person you can hire that I have trained a bit. And then they know if they run into something they don't know, they'll call me and I'll help them through it. The cemeteries will contact me now and say, hey, I've heard about you. Can you come and help? What can we do? Can we do anything to save this? And can you help with this? And then every now and then I'll see one like in Beaver and be like, hey, cemetery, let me fix that. Or hey, Salt Lake City, let me work on this Japanese hillside.
Just do it.
Yeah, it's part of my program. And I'm like sometimes when I take a stone, I say you will get it back maybe in a year. Like I will work on it as I can, and it's not my fault. Like I do all those other parts to my job. So they're usually like, okay, that's fine. So yeah, it's just part of my program, and it's part of. And sometimes I'll charge the cemetery if I'm doing a lot. I'll charge them for the product that I use, and then I make them help me. I'm like, you can help me dig, you can help me like, and you can give me the rock.
Okay, no,
Yeah, it's part of a way that I get to train them, and then I get help because otherwise it's just me, and I make them pay for the rock, so I have to transport it. Less thing heavy I have to lift, right? So, there is like some reciprocation of like what I expect from them. I don't just go in and do it, blah, blah, blah. And most of them are super happy to. I mean, Salt Lake City will bring me a front loader, a thing of dirt, and just leave it there, and then they'll help me with whatever. Yeah, they just don't have the manpower to like deal with any of it. So it's kind of a combination. But yeah, I do have families call me periodically, and then I point them to other people that they can hire, because I don't want to do it all myself. I can't do it all, but I want this to become more of a thing that Utahns understand we can do. There's really no me in the Rocky Mountain region. So getting, Utah to be like, hey, people know what they're doing in Utah is great. That's kind of my goal. It's just slow going. We'll get there.
Good. That's the thought. So good. Brilliant. So this back to out there. You say, awesome.
Well, I think Rusty this last go around on one of those roads actually brought up that wall on the edge. I probably wouldn't do anything until you really uncovered any historic things that may have already been there to identify where that path was. And then
All like
I didn't know that wall was there. So when he brought that up, I was like, wow.
you have to be very but
Yeah, and you've been doing some ground penetrating radar to identify where you may have people buried that you didn't know. But typically, if it's a historic pathway, in that area, you wouldn't have burials there. Other places that can't say with them, but no, I think you can, for what you feel like you need to do. But you have a lot of historic little wall and copings along those roads that I think I'd see if Rusty couldn't figure those out before you did anything there.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, or they'll use like Virgin, they'll caulk it all together, and then you'll just be like, "Whoa!" Right? So you want it done right, Morgan.
I just wonder there how they can just hear to doing something like that, especially to that do all the way that they just
Yeah, you have a lot in. Yeah, definitely. You have a lot in Glenwood that people have done things that we just don't touch because they're holding. But
fight people bar
sorry.
so that's the name of the right line with oh when we grab that size makes that's what I'm gonna make it about I had about 5 1 year something and since they did work stop in 2019 so then they run to 88 that's the run thing you want to stop and doing the floor medic and those suburbs since when they get you keep it out and you get so that's what I was shooting you with those 5 things but belly out
Yeah, I'll come up and like do one, and then I'll be like, "It's good to see you, Rusty," and then
Um,
shut up.
let's find it out.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's get
yeah. I mean, I did 10 in 2 days in Fillmore, but I knew it was going to be 2 days because some things, if you have epoxy, you got to let it cure and it has to be dry, and then you're going to do the mortar, it has to be wet. So you can't do all of the repairs. Usually are multi days. And then if I need to take it to my lab, if I can lift it and I have to treat it because it's in really rough shape.
I wonder, my coming to into a black there. And I see it as thoroughly stuff. What's the guy like there? Get up and get to that.
Yeah, he doesn't have very many bear in Texas. He doesn't know what he's to do with them. We would know. We'd be like, it's fine.
Getting trailer to sale. So that,
But not a bad thing. Yeah, not a bad thing.
somebody just to get that some situation and on our site say, are you allowed to come in soon? I'm excited. Fine. Sorry. Down. And what's so what the call? But in the last situation, I don't think that things like it's always out that. And yeah, that's when it's good.
I will tell you from a preservation standpoint, that's not the best practice.
Not at least I started to get to do.
Yeah, one of the best ways to take an impression with the aluminum foil, and then you're not rubbing on it's not leaving a residue. If you want to read what
Somebody still have best on it.
I know, but it's not leaving a residue. If you're going to get a good charcoal impression, it will. Yeah.
And you got the word. I don't.
Yeah.
I tell you, something and all it out that city. It's good.
Yeah, it's ultimately the decision in Utah, it's the decision of the cemetery. State law requires them to have rules, but is pretty open about what their rules can be. They just have to have them. And most cemeteries don't necessarily have a stated policy on that, but they'll get Boy Scout groups and those things that want to do stuff, and they usually don't want the liability if something goes wrong. Yeah, but if you went in there under the guise of night and you did what you did, then nobody would them. Right? I'm not saying you should do that, but that's what happens. That's what happens. What you absolutely, and people still do this, and you shouldn't do it. Some guys will go around and put shaving cream on them because then they can get a great picture of it. And that is horrible for historic stones because that's organic. It's going to get sucked into that stone and it will not interact well with the actual stone. So there's just a lot of practices that have been done over the years. And then people hear about that and they go, oh, that's great. So on my website, I have links to good websites with good information and links to good videos. Because if you just went on the internet or YouTube, you would see all these horrible things that I've just stopped looking at. And my family will send me stuff, and I'm like, I stopped sending that to me because it just drives me nuts. Almost as much nuts as like that Gibson ball, but not quite. So it's if you do it properly and based on why you want to do it, if you want an impression or you want to understand what it says, there's other ways that aren't as potentially damaging. But if you're just doing an impression one-off, and nobody ever does it again, you're really not going to damage it. It's like the over and over and over that can really cause problems. Yeah.
So it's very interesting and very connected down against them. God, the better, and the trust, constantly met by feeling that,
Yeah, so to properly clean, there is a product called D2 Biological Solutions. I get it from Rusty, mainly because I get a lot of stuff from him, but there's a couple websites you can buy it from, and that's all on my website too. Oh, you can just trim around it. I mean, for me to raise the flat ones are super easy. I can do that by myself. It's just a shovel and a pry bar. And I'll tell you a fun story. So Draper called me and they had two. Then it sunk, and the new city recorder was like, I really want to deal with these. And I remember meeting you, and I'm talking to all the public works guys and the parks guys, and they don't want to touch them. They say they're going to break. I'm like, you're going to break them? What do you mean? And I told her, I'm like, we could do this. And she went quiet, and I said, I don't get their problem because all you need is a shovel and a pry bar. And then she went quiet and she goes, do you mean we could do this ourselves? And I said, yeah. So that was like a Monday night. Well, at the end of the day, Monday and Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., she emails me and says, Parks Department heard we were going to do it ourselves, and so they just did it. And I was like, imagine how easy that was for them. And she showed me a picture, and I'm like, that looks fine. And yeah, those are actually fairly easy, but they can definitely be lost pretty as they sink and tip in the ground and grass grows over them. So, but keeping those trimmed is a big help. Very much so. Yeah. When I'm asked, yeah.
We're all here to see the care, and he said they could like one you.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I do workshops, usually on request, and then like I don't because I'll do those. I just did one in Murray. Next Thursday, I'm doing one in Logan. So I do those on request, and then usually a lot of the preservation because I don't do them for like individual like family members or that. I usually work with the cemeteries on those. And then when I'm asked to do talks or presentations, I do them. Yeah. So it's just I try to be available for anything. It's just being only me. I react a lot more than I'm proactive. Yeah. So, well, thank you all for coming. I hope that you enjoyed it and you got to see a little bit of the state.